Hello, this is Jonathan Little. We are going to continue going through this replay of the big $5 tournament for CzechRaizor. We are currently at the final table with a acceptable chip stack. Let's go ahead and move forward.
I decided to jam. Yeah, I think this will get too many folds. And yeah, still I think it's very interesting to discuss this one. Maybe if I had like king 3 off or ace 2 off, any kind of blocker, then I could have gone for raise fold. Because I just do not see this guy like jamming king jack or king 10 or even like ace 4 off. I think he would not be very comfortable to shove. It's surprising how nitty these players get when it gets to these cut up spots in deep runs. So yeah, again, very interesting to discuss how far I can take it, as far as abusing him goes and trying to avoid running into the top of his range.
So we discussed that spot in the previous video, but you mentioned king 3 offsuit in that spot. I definitely agree that you would want to min raise hands like king, or not necessarily min raise, but raise hands like king 3 offsuit, because with those hands you can very confidently raise fold because you're never getting the right price to call, assuming you do think he's only putting it in with the top of his range, which I think we have to assume given his stats. So kind of an interesting spot that whenever you have a king high hand or maybe a queen high hand, you should be raise folding, whereas with 7-4 suited, you probably should just open jam every time. But even then, shoving the king 3 can never be that bad.
Yeah, this would be a suicide to try to run over this big stack guy who's very, very active and plays back a lot and so on, and 2 short stacks in the play, still in play. So this will be an ICM suicide, and I'm glad I'm not going to sail in that boat.
Yep. Whenever under the gun raises, you probably just want to fold, even if he is active.
Someone play blinds. I would not be defending pocket deuces. I do not like defending pocket deuces 3s 4s in big blind ones. I'm shallow, and this is an easy of a spot. It makes it very easy fold once there's a 3-bet in the button.
Yeah, I'm never getting out of line there and 4-betting or anything. I probably would have set mine, though.
Fold it to me.
We actually saw you fold in a spot earlier whenever the initial raiser made it 2 big blinds, and I think you folded something like pocket sixes in the small blind earlier. That's the spot where you were barely getting the right price to set mine, and I think here you are as well. And in both those spots, I would have very happily set mine for 2 big blinds total. So again, that kind of goes back to me being a little bit more splashy than you and being just generally a little bit more willing to see the flop and see what develops.
I can see a case for limping, even as weak as queen 4, or even making it like 2.5x again, because this guy's too tight and just too weak. And again, really would like to know whether it's better to limp or limp step flops, or making it like 2.5x and fold.
I'm a much bigger fan of limping. I mean, this obviously assumes the initial raiser folded here, and they fold around to you, but I'm a big fan of limping and developing a limping range, which is going to be quite wide, actually, versus players who are going to be playing somewhat aggressively and just somewhat intelligently, versus players who are way too tight. It's hard to make too big of an error if you're just overly aggressive. So for that reason, versus players like this, I'm definitely going to be raising with all of my hands, really. And I'm usually just going to be shoving once we start to get a little bit shallower, down to 10 big blinds or less. With larger stack sizes, I would probably be more inclined to make the 2.5x raise as you suggest.
I expect him to respond very, very straightforward to both these actions. So probably limping is less risky. Cost me less chips.
It's less risky, but at the same time, risk meaning you're going to go broke less often by limping. But it also, you let your opponent see the flop, right? And I think you'd much rather have him fold out 80% of his hands pre-flop than let him see a free flop and now fold out only, say, 60% of his hands on the flop. I think by raising pre-flop, you win the pot more often. Obviously, when you don't, you lose more. But when you limp, you lose 2 big blinds. And whenever you raise fold, I guess you're losing 2.5 big blinds or something like that. So I don't know. They're probably close. I don't think either play is much better than others, but I do know when someone is playing too tightly as this guy is, you usually just want to apply a lot of aggression, especially with your bad hands.
Once I run into a good hand, the negative or the downside is that he can hit flops with any 2 cards. Continue. So yeah, it will be very interesting again to find out. This is a cooler. Open a standard reshove from the button with hijack. That's a very standard hand. And I'm in a good shape. I'm again lucky or fortunate enough to level up without taking any huge confrontations.
It's always nice when that happens.
So spots like these make me think that raise folding could be a better option, or it could be a very good option with this play type. I mean the 7-4 suited hand, in that 7-4 suited hand. But again, let me stress that I consider that being an option specifically when facing a guy who's as tight as this. It would not be a good idea to do this with a standard opponent or even with a regular. Yeah, that is my opinion. That's what I think.
It's always important to quantify and classify the opponent you're talking about when you're discussing any poker scenario. I know a lot of amateur players just think, what would you do in this spot, right? They're not really thinking, what do I do in this spot versus this specific player? And that is incredibly relevant. I mean, everything we've been discussing kind of goes out the window if your opponent's going to be fighting for a lot of pots and jamming very wide. But that's not who we have here.
Yeah, it's probably for 7.5 AM, 1, 2, 3, 4, 7 into 4 could be Nash plus EV shove. Yeah, for 7M into 4 people it's Ace 3 suited plus. Into 5 people it's Ace 8 and Ace 5 suited plus. So it is in borderline plus EV micro plus EV shove and Nash shove. But given this guy being under 10 bigs deep, like 9 bigs, 8 bigs, it's being a less of an option, and I can't really raise fold, or off the top of my head I don't like raise folding. At the same time, it is a good hand in hijack, so I wonder what the best outcome is.
Oh man. So you keep going back to saying that this is a plus EV Nash shove, but that's not really that relevant whenever we are playing with these shallow-ish stack. Whenever we're playing with people who have shallower stacks than you or equal stacks like this guy here. So I'm not really so concerned with what is a plus EV or nearly plus EV Nash shove. I'm more so thinking, are my opponents going to be playing too loosely? Are they going to be playing too tightly? How do I get punished in this spot? And I think in this spot that if you do shove, you can get punished pretty hard just by the, either the bigger stacks or even the guy who has the same amount of chips as you calling, because you are in horrible shape. So in this spot, I think I would probably just fold, given we have the big stacks on our left in the blinds. And I would just be kind of patient. I think it's okay to be patient in this spot and not do anything silly. However, I don't mind raise folding. I think raise folding with ace X is a fine strategy, especially if you don't think the players yet to act are going to be getting too crazy. I imagine this could be a spot where you're supposed to raise and then not fold versus the small blind, given how completely crazy he looks. And I don't think you're wanting to do that. So if you think you're going to be getting played back at a lot by the guy in the small blind, and you don't want to get played back at by the guy in the small blind, then you should probably just fold.
Yeah, I think it's close and I like folding, but not being 100% sure. Alright, I cannot defend. 4-5 off again, probably limp stabbing would be an option, even at this stack depth.
Again, as that guy gets shorter, I'm just going to be more and more inclined to shove, because now whenever you shove and fail, it costs you fewer chips. And a lot of players are not drastically changing their calling ranges as they get shorter. It's not like the guy's just going to magically start playing better at a 7 big blind stack or a 6 big blind stack versus a 9 or 10 big blind stack. So I would have shoved in that spot, even with a 5-4 offsuit, because this guy seems to be way too tight.
This guy is just not
if they folded around you, of course.
Getting involved. He would not shove light, or he would not look for opportunities to restore. This is another spot, it's very similar, and I think it is the key to master these spots when there's a 5 BB or 6 BB short and you have like This is a definite plus shove, and I just don't like raise folding. So I think it's a shove or fold, and whether it's a shove, not sure. Yeah, this will really kind of help me to patch up my game, I think, in deep rounds, to be 100% sure in these spots. So it's one of the reasons of making a video like this.
So this scenario is similar to the previous one, but there are a few very key differences. The first is that now your hand's way better, right? Ace-9 suited is better than Ace-4 suited because when you get called by the middle pairs, now you're flipping instead of losing. So that's a very big deal. Also, you have fewer chips, right? So you've chipped down a decent amount. So given you've chipped down, well, one set of blinds, you now are not risking as much to win the pot. So that's the spot where I definitely would have shoved. Whereas on the previous hand, the Ace-4 suited, I think I would have either min-raised or folded, and I probably would have just folded. Obviously, the player in the cutoff, Fred, is now shorter stacked, so that's a reason to be a little bit more cautious. But with your hand right there, Ace-9 suited, I think it's fine to just shove. Again, if you had min-raised the Ace-4 suited earlier, and say you got it through, that may let you become aware that you can min-raise in this spot more often, more liberally, because maybe the players in the small blind and the big blind are not fighting that hard. Like, notice here, the guy in the big blind, or the small blind, even though he is crazy and aggressive, he can't just shove, right? If he just shoves, he's risking way too much for the player in the big blind. He's risking too much when the times that the player in the big blind wakes up with a premium hand and takes a bunch of chips from him. So this is a spot where I think I definitely would have shoved this. But it's always nice to know if you can expect your min raises to get through. And the way you can have any idea of if your min raises are going to get through is by min raising more often. And if you just never do it, you're never really going to know what you can get away with. So you often have to push the boundaries a little bit and maybe even make slightly negative EV raises. You know, maybe they lose you some tiny bit or roughly break even. But if they let you gain information that's going to be useful in the future, and at the final table, at the start of the final table, the info you're going to gain is going to be very useful, because you'll be able to use it throughout the whole final table. Making perhaps slightly too loose open raises is a good strategy, in my opinion, because you get to figure out what's going on.
To improve a game and improve my game and get clarification and get better and generate some interesting discussions and receive different opinions. Alright. This is another interesting one, but once the Fred Plima joins our stack depth or joins our stacks, I'm not pressured too much. There's no longer too much ICM pressure on my stack because I'm one of the short stacks, so I have to make plays right now, especially with him being too tight, so there's a very slim chance of him being involved in the next few hands because he's really sitting it out and waiting for a big hand. So yeah, I think that both options are equally good, flatting and shoving.
Right here, I think shoving is by far the best play. And the reason is because this guy's stats are way too loose. If he was playing somewhat standard, like maybe, well, I guess none of these guys are too standard. They all seem pretty active. And maybe that's because the heads-up display is a little bit flawed because we are deep in the tournament and you're playing six-handed instead of nine-handed. But, you know, this 40% VPIP is quite wide. Here's your heads-up display, and we're really interested in the small blind pre-flop raise, so the second number on the second line. And you see it's 40%, right? 40%, or no, 67%. 67% is very high. So this guy is raising very frequently when it folds to him. I would not really read too much into his raise size. So I'm just all in here every time. I think that your hand is great. I mean, you could get called by worse hands for all we know. So I definitely enjoy shoving in this scenario. You're going to have so much fold equity.
You know, I'm still racing with this guy for a pay jump, and I imagine with 6-way it starts to be quite significant. So flatting is the less risky one, but given how wide this guy is, it is a definitely big plus chip heavy shove, and I decided to go for it. I decided to take this route and shove and go over the top and shove it all in, and I did get a fold. So again, wonder how shoving does with flatting in this spot. Would be interesting to discuss all the possibilities.
You should definitely flat with some hands in the spot, mainly hands that are going to flop very well. Maybe stuff like Queen 10 offsuit, stuff like 9-8 offsuit. I mean, a lot of hands you can flat with that you don't necessarily want to be jamming. And, you know, it's fine to call. But I think Ace 2 suited is going to play way better as a shove. Mainly because you're often not going to have a very good hand on the flop, whereas when you shove pre-flop, you do have the best hand a pretty good amount of the time.
Possible scenarios and plans for flops, maybe. King Jack. Yeah, I cannot really defend. I cannot 3-bet fold, although it would look really strong under 20 bigs. I could probably experiment at some smaller field tables and in deep rounds, but this is not the spot I felt it would be good to experiment 3-betting under 20 bigs, making it look like top of my range. Shoving seems too risky. The risk reward is not quite there with King Jack off, I think.
I definitely would have shoved this one. And the reason for that is because this guy is opening so wide. If this guy was not opening very wide, I would probably have folded. But even then, I think shoving can never be that bad, mainly because you are effectively just short a stack at the table, right? We have you, the small blind, and the big blind all sort of racing to the bottom here. And you don't want to be racing to the bottom. You want to try to get some chips. And of course, moving up the payouts is important and obviously very relevant. The way you chip up and apply pressure and perhaps maybe even make this guy in the cutoff slow down because you're re-raising him so often is by shoving on him a decent amount of the time and making it to where he cannot just blindly raise every time he's in the cutoff and the button because he doesn't have to fear you, right? If he knows you're only going to be jamming with your best hands, he can just raise as often as he wants, and that's not what you want. You want to put this guy in a spot where he can't just raise every single time he feels like it. So anyway, I would have definitely shoved in that spot.
Yeah, I like folding here. Down to 5, and this guy's still 10-11 BBs short. And just too many ways to lose this hand. I could get 3-bet by this very aggressive guy on the big stack. I could get flatted by another big stack in the big blind or even small blind. So this hand doesn't play so well, doesn't flop so well, and then I have to see bet and give up and kind of see myself barreling on too many runouts. So that's why I opted and selected to fold.
This is a spot where, given these stacks, I think you just have to be somewhat snug now. Notice you've chipped up a bit. This guy has chipped down a bit. And there's nothing wrong with being somewhat tight when this scenario is going on, because if you open, any of these players can realistically attack you easily, right? No one has to do anything crazy to put you in a miserable spot. So I would just fold as well. It's okay to be tight. I mean, from early position with people on your left who can easily take advantage of you, don't do anything too crazy.
Question mark is, I wonder what to do with ace-9, ace-10. Ace-9 suited, ace-10 off. With 7.6 M. Yeah, basically just a hand that are very close plus EV nash shoves, but there's one guy sitting on a short stack.
So with hands like what you just mentioned, I would probably then min-raise fold. I think those are probably just a little bit too good, again, because the blocker value goes up a little bit. They're going to flop a little bit better, etc. So I would probably have opened those, but even then, I don't think folding would be out of the question. I think it would be acceptable enough.